youth up to 25 years old off the streets and put them on conservation programs. So I was stationed down at Haddam, Connecticut, working in a forest.
Wow. Why did you join?
My primary interest was to see the world because I had an unfortunate childhood. I was brought up in an orphan asylum, and I had no experience with the world. In fact, I got stuck in the forest with a CC camp, and so I really knew nothing about the world, and my primary reason was to see the world. Unfortunately, the Navy would deny that, as you'll learn.
And why did you pick the Navy?
Because I wanted to see the world.
And you thought the Navy was going to give you a better opportunity
Yes.
than the other branches?
They had many movies at that time about the service, and the service was full of happy sailors enjoying all kind of girlfriends and traveling around the world, and it was just one big fun fest.
Do you recall your first days in service?
Yes, it was a boot camp up at old age is making me forget things, up at Rhode Island. Not Quonset Point. There's some island up there in Rhode Island. I forgot the name already.
What was boot camp like?
It was for 3 months of very rigid training, and it was based on the old Navy. We had to sleep in hammocks and wash our clothes in salt water, and basically it was just one drill after another, and primarily to teach discipline.
Do you remember any of your instructors?
No, I don't. I remember their appearances, but most of them were very young, probably just out of the academy or just, they weren't much older than I. They seemed to be about 20, 21 years old. I guess they were being trained too.
Do you have any memorable experiences from boot camp?
No, there was no opportunity because it was just continual training from I guess we woke up about 6 in the morning and lights out at 8 at night, and there wasn't any time for any festivities, and we never got ashore, so for 3 months we were stuck there.
No, it was on an island?
It was on an island.
Rhode Island?
Yes.
So you never left that little island?
Never. Except after 3 months, they gave us 1 day off. One unusual experience I had was for 3 days I was on the USS Constitution. That was the old sailing ship from the Revolutionary Wars, and they used it as a canvas. All the canvas work was done on that ship. So I was on there for 3 days.
Training?
Basically to do odd work that they wanted.
After your 3 months of basic training, where did you go?
Down to Norfolk, Virginia, and we were in a battalion, so the whole battalion went as one group down to Norfolk, and they were put on different ships. I was put on the USS Quincy, which was a heavy cruiser, in for overhaul, and I was on there for 3 weeks, and from there I was transferred to the USS Ranger.
Ranger?
Ranger was an aircraft carrier, and I was very fortunate getting off the Quincy because 3 years later she was sunk and most of her hands were lost in the battle off the Guadalcanal, in the sea battle I had out there.
Wow. All right, so when you went down to Norfolk, you went with your whole battalion who had been through basic training
Yes.
together, and then they split you up. Did you stay with any guys from your original group or nobody?
None at all. No.
Oh. At this point, did you have a specific job assigned to you? Were you an electrician's mate yet?
I was captain of the head. That means, you know, that is, it's the toilet cleaner.
That was your
First
assigned
assigned.
duties? Captain of the head?
On the Quincy, yes.
When you went to the USS Ranger, did you get promoted to a different job?
Well, I was put in the C department, and basically all that amounted to was cleaning the ship, polishing brass, scrubbing floors, and that type of thing. I had a battle station on a machine gun. Now, the Ranger, it was an odd-looking ship because it had 6 smokestacks that folded over the side to allow the planes to fly off it. It was the first ship built as an aircraft carrier, so it was a pretty old ship.
Wow, that must have been interesting to serve on.
It was because, I mean, everything was secret in those days, and if they showed pictures of an aircraft carrier in a movie, they always censored the cables they had on the deck. It was so secret.
You boarded the USS Ranger in Norfolk, Virginia. Then did you go out to sea?
Yes, in fact, I never got off the sea.
Where did you go first?
Okay, we went down to Guantanamo Bay, which was nothing but a Quonset hut naval base, and had maneuvers down there. Went through a hurricane, and from there we had liberty on an island of Calibra, which was there was nothing on the island. The only civilization on the island was a hot dog stand. But they had
Where was this island?
in the Caribbean. I think it was part of the Virgin Islands. They had a beautiful beach there. We went swimming there, and they had these small midget horses. We were allowed to ride on those. We were there for one day. Then we stopped at St. Thomas for one day. And what I mean by one day, we were allowed about 6 hours there. And then, of course, losing track of time, we also stopped at Ponce, Puerto Rico, which was a beautiful place, for one day.
What year is this now? What year did you enlist?
1939. In fact, I tried to enlist in 38, but there were only 75,000 people in the Navy at that time. In contrast, there were 3 million 6 years later.
1939, that was early in the war for you to get
Yes.
there.
Well, in fact, the war in Europe had something to do with it. It was so restrictive, they rejected me simply because they said I had overbite. And, but a year later, the war in Europe started in September 1939 with the invasion of Poland. And 1 week later, they called me in.
They said, we'll take you after all.
Yes.
So it was in September of
Oh,
1939?
October, basically.
October of
Yeah.
1939. All right, so after going to your islands and getting your one-day leave on those islands, where did you go?
Well, of course, about 6 months before Norfolk is the only port we went to. We went to Charleston for one day, and those were the only ports I went to before the war. When the war started, we went on patrols across the Atlantic, back and forth, in fact, and mostly we were on patrols to inform the British where the submarines were. In other words, we were very cooperative, and strangely, we would darken our whole ship except put a string of lights around it and have a huge American flag in the back to let the Germans know that we we were American. And of course they were doing everything they could to avoid us. But 6 months before Pearl Harbor, we got into the war. We began sinking submarines, and the Germans began sinking our ships. We had about 6 of our destroyers sunk before the war, and we had a constant bulletin board saying any submarine that does not identify itself, bomb it. And we bombed subs about 3 times. And
did your ship, the USS Ranger?
yes, yes.
Where?
Oh, in the Atlantic. I don't know where, but
Somewhere in the Atlantic.
Yeah,
that's where your ship always was stationed.
We used to make patrols. We'd go up off the English coast, down to the Canary Islands, and back to the Norfolk. And these were 14-day patrols. And in Norfolk, we would stay there for 1 or 2 days just to pick up supplies. And half the ship would go ashore, the other half wouldn't. And then we'd go on another 14-day patrol. So over
Was
6...
it always the same route?
Same
that the
route.
patrol went on?
Yes. See, that would, for submarine patrol, it would cover all the transportation routes.
And then when you came back, the other half of the
Yes.
to get their leave?
So in 6 months, we probably got ashore maybe 6 times.
Not much.
No.
Now you're 14 days out on submarine patrol. What was your job or duty?
As an I was able to transfer from the seaman to become an electrician.
Did you have any electrical training background?
No. No.
So they taught you?
Yes.
So then you were an electrician on the ship?
Yes.
What did you do as an electrician?
Well, basically, the equipment very seldom broke down, so it was mainly standing watches. My watch was on a switchboard and on a generator, mostly in the switchboard. The switchboard was in the middle of the ship, about 4 decks below, in solitary confinement. And when we were on patrol, it was always 4 hours on, 8 hours off. It was a regular 8-hour working day, but then 4 hours watch. So that's why there's no social activity, because we're always doing something. And so I was on the Ranger for 2.5 years. So for 2.5 years, I was basically in sensory deprivation. A switchboard room, below the water line, it's all you can hear is the hum of the switchboard, and no communication, and no reading material, no nothing.
That must have been tough on you.
Oh yeah, it was. You live like a monk, and for 2.5 years. Well, of course, the final outcome of all my service, I came out like, you lose your ability to think, you lose your ability to use your senses. You become a zombie, basically.
Now, where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
We were on we picked up 30,000 Canadian troops up in Newfoundland, and we brought them to Cape Town, South Africa. They were on their way to the North African campaign. And we stopped at Trinidad, and in fact, it's very interesting. On the way from Trinidad, we met this Japanese freighter. It said it had come across a German pocket battleship. And as soon as we got that report, the whole ship went into combat status. All our planes loaded with bombs and torpedoes. We were out to sink that German pocket. This was before Pearl Harbor now. So we searched all day and night for that German ship. We couldn't find it. And the next day at 2 o'clock, they announced over the radio, Pearl Harbor has been bombed. This is no drill. Carry out plan number so-and-so. Of course, as soon as that happened, up until that time, we never feared the Germans because they didn't want us into the war. But as soon as that happened, we went full speed back to Norfolk, and there we stayed for 3 months without leaving the port. See?
Wow. Now, before we entered the war and you were doing submarine patrol, you said you sunk out 3?
3 times we depth charged our planes did.
Can you describe what it was like to be on? Now, your carrier was an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
So would you sink it from the boat, or would your planes take off and sink submarines from the air? How did that work?
The destroyers would usually find the submarine, or they always had a plane patrolling. And if they spotted it, they would call back, and the bombers would go out to do it. But in every case that we had, the destroyers depth charged them. So we always had a convoy with surrounding destroyers around us.
How big would your convoy of ships be that you went on patrol with?
Well, we were on several convoys, but the biggest one had 5 of the biggest American civilian liners. They were converted to transports, and they were the biggest ships that they could have, and they carried 30,000 Canadian troops. They were the ones that went down to Cape Town, and there was a standing order that anyone who fell off the ship at that time would not be picked up because of the threat. And also because of the threat, anytime sailors crossed the equator, they were initiated by a very grotesque initiation, but they canceled that because of the threat. And we had 2 people commit suicide on that trip, and one of them was cut up by a propeller, because we always had dawn patrol, you know.
So 2 sailors committed suicide?
Yes.
They couldn't take the stress?
Yes. Yeah, because we never got ashore. As you say, in 6 months we got ashore about 6 times.
How big was your ship? Like, how many men would be on your ship, the USS?
Oh, about 1,800. I mean, compared to carriers today, it was very small.
All right, so once we entered the war, you went back to Norfolk, Virginia, and stayed 3 months. What did you do for the 3 months you were there? Outfitting the ship?
Well, for about 2 of those months, we were up at Chesapeake Bay, being very secretive, testing what they call a degaussing system. That
Can
big
you spell that?
Degaussing. And what that was they put this huge cable about that thick, maybe 8 inches thick, all around the ship to make the ship a big magnet. And the reason for that is the Germans had come up with a magnetic mine. And any ship going by the magnetic mine would set it off and blow it. So they used the Ranger to test for an anti-magnetic situation. So for 3 months we were testing that.
Did it work?
Apparently, I mean, of course they wouldn't tell us. These were all secrets.
And after your 3 months in Norfolk, where did you head out?
Well, that's all we did out of... from there we went to Bermuda for 3 months. And the reason for that is they were building an airstrip out there. They had this lend-lease situation where the British lent their bases to us and we lent all our ships to them. And so they were building an airfield in Bermuda, and so until that was built, the Ranger anchored in the harbor for air protection and also to get experience using the base.
So you get to go ashore, at least in Bermuda?
Well, despite us being there for 3 months, I got ashore about 8 times. That's all.
And then where did you go?
Well, of course, all we did was go on these patrols. We went on these patrols about 6 times, 14 days. So from there...
So even after we entered the war and you went to Bermuda and stuff, you still just kept patrolling that same...
Yeah, well, once in a while we had a sidetrack. Like we had a sidetrack. We went up to Placentia Bay in Newfoundland, and that was when Churchill came over here to have a discussion with Roosevelt up in Newfoundland, and so we went up into Placentia Bay to be a temporary air base, you know, for his protection.
How many airplanes would your
We
household?
I forget exactly, but probably about 80. They had two decks there, the hangar deck and the main deck. We had another experience. They built a new base up at Quonset Point, and up there
Where's
took-
Quonset Point?
in Rhode Island.
Is that where you were trying to think of for your basic?
No, that's another base.
Quonset Point?
Yeah. And there we picked up about 80 Army planes, P-40 Army planes. And we took them to the Gold Coast of Africa. They were on their way to the Flying Tigers. Ever hear of the Flying Tigers? Well, the planes that they had were moved there by the Ranger. In fact, we made 2 trips with them. On one of those trips, second trip, off the Gold Coast of Africa, they said there was a wolf pack of 20 submarines that our destroyers attacked, and so that was one combat situation we had there.
Can you describe that? What happened?
Well, of course, we didn't see it. Anytime something like that happened, we just moved away from it and let the destroyers do their work.
So your job is to find the submarines and then you get out of the way?
Well, no, our job was to convoy. And if we met submarines, then get out of their way, let the destroyers handle them. Yeah. And of course, our planes could fly a great distance. They would cooperate with the destroyers. But we were not inside of anything.
Were there any casualties in your unit?
Not battle casualties. I say they were suicides.
Suicides?
Yeah. And one person that I know of was chopped up by a propeller.
And that was accidental?
Yes. No, at dawn patrol it's still dark, and these fellows on deck are working in the dark.
Can you tell me what a typical day would be like for you when you were out on patrol? Was there a typical day?
It's the same thing we had every day.
Oh,
Well, we get up with the bugle sound and go to breakfast, and then go to our electrical jobs. The only electrical job I had was put oil into motors. The repair work was done by the experienced people. And we work 8 hours a day, and when it's short, it's 8 hours a day, and then one watch period during the day. But out at sea, you'd have 2 watch periods during the day, plus 8 hours. So basically you were working all day, except for sleeping.
and you said you were 2.5 years on the Ranger?
Yes.
Where did you go after that?
I was transferred to Staten Island, where they were building a new destroyer called the Beale,
B-E-A-L?
B-E-L-E.
And was that another aircraft carrier?
No, that was a destroyer. That's a picture of it. See the sample of it.
So, what did you do on a destroyer that was different than on the aircraft carrier?
Well, I was a supervisor. I was in charge now of 13 electricians. I mean, there were two first-class electricians and 1 chief. So it was the first class who did all the supervising. So I was the supervisor of these 13 electricians.
Okay, so by now you've been promoted to, is this when you were the electricians mate first class?
Yes.
So what would you have to do?
Well, just maintain all the electrical equipment, repair it if it broke down, and stand watches. And
Is a destroyer a lot smaller than an aircraft carrier?
well, as I
Staff-wise?
say, that's a model of it on my mantle, yeah.
That's a destroyer.
Yes.
Now, is that smaller than an aircraft?
Oh, yes. It's the aircraft carriers are 1,200 feet long, and this is 375 feet long. Yeah.
So that was a lot different.
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
And how long were you on the USS Beale?
2.5 years.
Oh, another 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Now, what did you do for those 2.5 years, and where did you go?
Well, I've been on. There was 11 invasions, 2 sea battles, numerous air attacks, and numerous shore bombardments, and numerous convoys. So,
Can you describe some of those? Now, you went on some sea battles and invasions. Which invasions?
every invasion on New Guinea up to the Philippines. That's
Do you remember the order of the invasions you went on?
not really.
So, New Guinea,
New Guinea up to the Philippines. I have a picture up there that I painted. You see that picture? That was at a place called Cape Gloucester, and you can see what happens to a destroyer when 2 bombs hit it. 1/3 of the ship has disappeared, and we were alongside that ship when it was bombed. That was one of the invasions, and so this is just one example. Incidentally, that I made that painting, and it's on a sea bag. Sea bag is very thick canvas that I won in a gambling. Gambling was our only activity, social activity.
that canvas is from your sea bag?
Yes.
That picture's made of? You did that while you were
Yeah.
over there?
Yeah, I won a paint set as a gambling. Some guy he owed me money for a gambling debt, so he gave me a paint set. So I painted that.
Well, you must have had some artistic ability.
Never,
You're
no,
kidding.
no.
Well, I'll take a picture of that before I
Yeah.
leave. So that was at Cape Gloucester. What was that?
In fact, it's she mentions New Britain Island, so it's connection to New Britain here.
Yeah.
Cape Gloucester on New Britain Island.
Can you remember any of the invasions that you can describe?
Well, on this invasion, there were 90 Japanese planes came in to attack us. Most of them were knocked down by our airplanes, but I gave a full description of this particular attack in this binder here. But what happened there was these planes came in, and 2 dive bombers came at us, and 2 dive bombers came at the Bronson. That's a destroyer there. And of course the bombs missed us, but they got a direct hit on the Bronson. And as I say, 1/3 of the ship disappeared in the middle, and 5 minutes later it folded up like a knife and disappeared. Oh,
Okay, so you were telling me about this invasion where 90 Japanese planes attacked.
yeah. And so the Bronson folded up like a jackknife and sunk. And of course, there were 90 sailors killed on that ship, and some of them were killed when the ship went down. Her depth charges went off, and so her own ship killed quite a few of them. And okay, another incident. There are a lot of incidents going on, but one particular incident was this Betty bomber. It's a 2-engine bomber. It came toward our ship, and as it's coming, when things happen like this, it's always in slow motion. The mind functions. So I'm watching this huge bomber coming at us very low, and you could see our bullets are splattering all over. I mean, really chopping it to pieces. And it came over my head, missed our antenna by maybe inches, and I turned around to watch it on the other side, and it got maybe 200 feet off our ship, and the wings fell off and it dropped into the ocean. You know. Of course, all the while this is going on, the other ships are swirling all over the place, shooting planes down. In fact, I was fascinated by one incident. There were 3 P-38 fighter bombers. They're powerful planes. They had one slow Japanese torpedo plane traveling very slowly.
So the P-38s were American?
American. And they made circles around him 4 times, and you'd see the whole ocean spraying up with bullets, and they couldn't knock him down. Really, it was strange. So we shot down 2 planes in this particular battle.
Can you remember any other sea battles or invasions?
Well, another sea battle we had was when we, about 8 of our destroyers and 2 cruisers chased about 6 Japanese destroyers, and the cruisers couldn't keep up, so it was just our destroyers chasing them. They fired torpedoes at us, and they could fire shells at us, but we couldn't fire at them because we were closing in on them, but they were getting away from, so we're always out of range. And their ships could travel just as fast as ours could. So we chased them, from about 6 o'clock at night till 2 o'clock in the morning. And then we had to, just when we got one of them on fire, we had to turn around and come back, because by dawn, Japanese planes would be able to get at us. So we had to quit that battle. But then I was in the Battle of Surigao Strait in the Philippines. And that was when about 4 or 5 battleships and a dozen destroyers and cruisers came into the Philippines to attack our troops who had landed. And the way the battle was set up, the Japanese were coming through this narrow strait, so they put about 10 destroyers on each side of the strait. I was in one of those groups, and when the Japanese battleships came in, the destroyers went in, made a torpedo attack on them, and we didn't get credit, but although at the time they said our torpedoes hit this Japanese battleship, which was sunk, and that the whole Japanese fleet was basically sunk in that battle. See?
Wow. Now, what year are we talking? Are we up to...
Oh, we're up to 1945 now. And of course, in that battle, that was a sea battle, but in the invasion of the Philippines, it was the first time they used kamikazes, and so for 5 days, these kamikazes were continually attacking all these ships that were basically at anchor there. And there was a lot of sinking there, a lot of...
Did you witness any kamikaze attacks on other ships?
Unfortunately, I was down in the engine room, and as you read my report there, all the reports I was getting through my headphones. So all this battling was going on, but
you're not actually on deck?
I was on deck with Cape Gloucester. I saw the whole thing there, and I was on deck for about a year, watching these other invasions and shore bombardments, air attacks. But for the Philippines and for 2...
Well, how was that for you to be down below deck and not be able to see what's going on and only hearing parts of it from your headphones?
After I was numb to it. After 4.5 years of combat, it was just another trip. It didn't bother me. You get numb to this after a while. No, but I was, as you read there, everything you read in that report is exactly as it happened, as it was told to me.
Oh, great. Were you awarded any medals or citations?
No. Our ship, there were 8 ships in a squadron, Our ship came out with only one casualty. It was hit by shrapnel and no damage, basically. But all the other ships, I think 3 or 4 of them were sunk, and one shot its own stack off and killed 90 people. One was rammed and killed a few people. 2 were hit by kamikazes. In other words, all the other ships were almost totally destroyed or sunk. We came without a scratch.
Wow, that was pretty good.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you a few questions about daily life. How did you stay in touch with your family, or did you stay in touch with your family?
Well, I told you I was an orphan, so I didn't have any family to get in touch with.
So there was nobody back home you stayed in touch with?
No.
What was the food like?
Terrible. It was maggoty rice, Australian rabbit, which is nothing but big bones and skin around the edge, and dehydrated. Dehydration was just coming in. It's not like it is today. But they had dehydrated eggs, dehydrated potatoes, no fruit, no vegetables outside of dehydrated, and see, we never got ashore in the Pacific, except twice we went to Australia for a week. But all our supplies came from ships, and if you look at that photograph I have, I weigh 145. So we lived basically on, we could buy chocolate in the chocolate bars in the storeroom there. That's about it. No, the food was terrible.
Now, when you got back, the times you did get back to Norfolk or station, would you get to eat regular food in a mess hall?
Oh yeah, the Navy food is very good when you
get it.
When you get it.
But not out on the...
No, not in the Pacific.
Did you have enough of other supplies and resources that you needed?
For myself or the ship?
You and the ship.
Yeah, the ship was usually well supplied. I mean, not with good food, but But
with ammunition and materials?
Yes,
and
we were always well supplied.
Did you feel any pressure or stress?
I'd say no, I got used to it. And
Even all those battles and all that danger around you?
No, it didn't. You know, as they say, the Battle of the Atlantic could have been even worse than the Pacific, because for 2.5 years I lived on a constant submarine threat. I was below the waterline, and about a year before Pearl Harbor, there were about 100 ships sunk in 3 months off the Atlantic. And so I was always under that threat of a torpedo coming into my switchboard. Well, if I worried about that, I would have been crazy. But you adjust to it. You go through years of it. It's just another trip, really. No, I didn't have stress, but what happened, though, is the best years of your life is when you're between 18 and 24. And 18 and 24, I never got ashore. I said, but I got ashore about 60 days in 6 years. Yeah.
Was there anything that you did special for good luck?
Not really. No. I'd say everything was routine after all. I made some cartoons in that book. And an example of what I mean by you get used to it, one cartoon shows us all the sailors practically falling asleep on deck, and a cannon is shooting. The first cannon, it shows 2 pictures. The first cannon, everybody's excited. The cannon's going off. The 14th bombardment, they're all sleeping. And so after a while, they're sleeping through battles, because there's nothing to do. I do, actually, in a battle. You just wait until something happens.
What did people do to entertain themselves?
shoot crap and play poker, and that's about all. On a destroyer, there's nothing else to do. And when we went out there, nobody prepared themselves with books or magazines, so they had no movies or nothing.
Did you become a good gambler?
I won $20,000, but I lost it all.
Wow. Was that poker or shooting crap?
That was shooting crap. Yeah.
Wow. You lost it all the
Yeah.
same day?
Well, a couple days.
Time.
Yeah.
And
No,
then for entertainment, you said that you also, you did some drawing, and you did, in your gambling, you won the paint box. Did you do any other painting besides that one?
no, just that one. I mean, I did these at home, but
But not while you were in the service?
no.
Did you ever get to see any other entertainers? Did you ever get any place where they had USO shows or anything?
Never.
Did you get any leave or R&R while you were?
Not in the Pacific. When we came back from the Pacific, they sent me to Treasure Island, and from there I went for 2 weeks at some resort hotel.
Where's Treasure Island?
It's an island off San Francisco.
So you went, where did you go for your 2-week leave?
A town called Sonoma in California, and they had a town of country all by itself. It's a big resort hotel, and basically it's you could do anything there that you could at a resort hotel.
Wow, well that must have been nice for you after 4 years of seeing nothing.
Well, to be realistic, they had all the facilities. I didn't know how to take advantage of it. I mean, as they say, between 18 and 24, I forgot how to live, and I didn't know how to take advantage of all the things I had.
And was that your only leave?
No, from there, I was transferred to the East Coast for shore duty. In fact, I got gypped out of beautiful shore duty. My captain had some sympathy for me, so he wanted to make sure I had shore duty. So he sent me to Interior Communications School in Washington. But while I was at the Brooklyn receiving station waiting for this transfer, I had a sister who got married up in Massachusetts. So I took the weekend up to go to the wedding. When I came back, he said, "Sorry, we already sent that transfer out. Somebody else has it." And then, to add to the misery, they sent me down to Little Creek, Virginia, for the next ship going back to Japan for the invasion of Japan. Yeah,
Oh my gosh, so what year was that? Now you must have been in
this 1945.
Oh, that must have been very disappointing for you. Not
Well,
only do you lose out on the shore duty, but you're going back
yeah,
the heat of battle in the Pacific.
yes. But while I was at Little Creek, all these cheap petty officers were 90-day wonders. They'd never been out at sea, and they'd only been in the Navy maybe a year or so, and they're bossing me around like, you know, I'm nothing. And that got me mad. And everyone going into the camp had to go through a psychiatric interview. And of course, they asked questions like, do you get drunk? Oh yes. Do you get sloppily drunk? Yeah. And what else do you do? Nothing. You get drunk. And in other words, I answered the questions to make it look like I probably was a little nutty because of no social activity. But I answered the questions as making me neurotic. And that, of course, gave me an immediate transfer to another resort hotel.
Oh, good. Where was this?
This is Asbury Park for 2 weeks,
Where's that?
New Jersey. And there again, I was a social misfit, I'll tell you that, because I went in there knowing nothing and came out knowing nothing about society. So I stayed there for 2 weeks, and they transferred me to Dover, New Jersey, an ammunition depot, which was like being in a haunted house. There's nothing there, just silence. And I mean, there's an ammunition depot, but nobody came there to get ammunition, and only very few people there.
So what did you do there?
Nothing, just hung around, and there was no activity to participate in.
How long did you stay there?
I'd say about 3 months, 3 or 4 months. I had an incident there, though. While I was walking around there, I passed by this sand pile, and I saw this kid with his head under the sand. So I ran over, pulled him out, and started giving him artificial respiration, all while yelling my head off. A few, maybe 100 feet away was a, place where they make horseshoes, a blacksmith shop. So I yelled, and they came running out, and pretty soon they called everybody else, but by this time the kid was dead. And strangely, they never, I don't know what kind of investigation they had, but they never called me for an investigation.
What do you think happened? The sand fell down on him?
I don't know. The pile wasn't more than that high, and his head was underneath the sand. I don't know. Maybe he had a stroke or something and fell down and hit the pile and covered his head.
Wow. You said you went to Australia.
Yes.
Twice. When and for what reason did you go to Australia?
Well, right after we had about 6 invasions, after about a year, they sent us down there, not for our recreation, but to overhaul the ship. And of course, and when we got down there, they split up the time ashore, so we had 5 days ashore. And the second time was or just before the Philippine invasion. We went for another 5 days.
Did you get to see any parts of Australia?
I got tied up with some female, and that was my mistake. I mean, I saw some of us. I saw Australia from the ship. I saw the main street, but then I met this girl, and
that's what you did with your 5 days in Australia.
Yeah, spent it all in taverns. Yeah.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
I'd like to think so, but no. It's that there was no opportunity for it.
The guys didn't play pranks on each other?
No. Not on a destroyer. And as they say, when you go in the Atlantic, when you go on these 14-day patrols, it's depressing. And when you're depressed, you don't feel too humorous. And that's why I guess the 2 committed suicide.
What did you think of officers and your fellow sailors?
I had a lot of contempt for the officers on a carrier, because most of them were, as I say, the Navy was building up and ranks were going up fast, and too many of these, in fact, very few of them were out of the academy, and most of them were reserve, and they liked to throw their weight around as though they were the aristocracy. And they didn't get much respect. I mean, we did our jobs, but it was different on the destroyer. On the destroyer, everything was informal, and there was a lot of respect for the officers.
And then you talked about these 90-day wonders when you came back again. Can you tell us what a 90-day wonder is?
They were those had ROTC training, and basically 90 days of it, and that made them an officer. But that was a very common expression, 90-day wonder.
What did you think of your fellow sailors?
Well, as I say, there was never any I mean, the situation was such that we could never really get to know each other. We're all on watches all the time doing, and most of our electrical work is solitary work. And like on the Carrier Ranger, I spent most of my time, working time, in a battery room by myself, and with no opportunity to talk to anyone. And most of the jobs were solitary, and so you never really got to know anyone. But the only time you had any informality was shooting crap or playing poker.
Did you form any friendships while you were in the service, or no?
Yeah, well, I had 3 or 4 friends that lived around here, and after the war, they're all dead now, but after the war we used to meet every once in a while.
Oh, you did. Did you know them in the service, and they all lived in, now did you always live in East Hartford, Connecticut?
Yes, either Hartford or here. Yeah, they lived between Massachusetts and Connecticut, and they were all on the BO, none from the Ranger.
All right, so now back to New Jersey. How long were you in New Jersey, and then where did you go?
Well, when the ship, I was in New Jersey when the ship was being built, and I was in New Jersey at the hotel. What do you want, the hotel? Or
Yes.
okay.
And where that boy was in the sand.
Yeah.
So then where did you go?
Well, after that, as I say, I was on the ammunition depot, solitary confinement. Nobody there, and I got tired of that, and in fact, I began to get a little nutty. I mean, I began to get. I'm trying to think of the name of it. There's a name for when you're afraid of society.
Agoraphobia.
Agoraphobia. I picked up agoraphobia there, and and it's basically from an ignorance of what to do in society. And at that ammunition depot, I had no one to go ashore with me. If I had someone, I would have gone. But with this agoraphobia, I mean, my ignorance was such that I couldn't enter any new place because I didn't know what to expect. So I was wasting my time there, so I went to the medical officer. I said, well, what can I do about this? So he suggested I go to a naval hospital. And I went to the naval hospital. Christ, I'm losing track of all my names there. It's on Staten Island. There's a naval hospital out there. And I stayed there for a month, and the war was over. And of course, I left on that day.
So you left right from that hospital?
Yes.
And you were discharged?
Yes.
Do you recall your last day in service?
Well, I was in this mental ward, and you never know it was a mental ward. Everyone there played all kind of games, and like they were the happiest people in the world, and I never saw anyone getting any treatment, so I don't know what was going on there, and I got no treatment. I mean, no one ever even questioned me. So, but on the last day, well, of course, the word came over that the atom bomb was dropped, and the next day the war was over, and the next day we all lined up and just they just asked one question: where did you work before you came here? And that's all. And they sent you home. And that was
They
it.
asked that, and they said you're discharged and
Yes.
you left, and you were
Yes.
on your own.
Yes,
So what did you do? Go back to Connecticut?
back to Connecticut.
And what did you do in the weeks and days immediately after your discharge?
Nothing. In fact, I was very fortunate by I told him I had worked at Pratt Whitney. Actually, I worked there for about a week before going into the CC camp. And I never expected to go back there, but apparently they called Pratt Whitney and told them that I had left there, entered the service. And Pratt Whitney called me in to work for them. That's where I went to work.
So you went back to work at Pratt & Whitney?
Yes.
Did you go back as an electrician or as your old job?
As an electrician.
And how long did you stay with Pratt & Whitney?
6 months, and then they went on strike, and that made me go to college on a GI Bill.
Where did you go and what did you study?
I went to the annex, and they call it Annex Denver, it's a branch of UConn.
UConn?
Yeah.
And what did you study?
Well, liberal arts for 2 years. And then I went, after 2 years, I went to Hilliard College, which was a new college that eventually became the University of Hartford. And it was just a grammar school converted to a college to take care of all the GIs. And
What did you get your degree in?
education. So I have a master's in education.
Did you teach after that?
I taught at the trade school in Hartford. The reason I taught in a trade school, I think I was blacklisted because I have a philosophical bent, and I expressed my own ideas too freely, and I didn't have enough knowledge about it. I actually had quit high school, and so I knew nothing about professors. You're supposed to always agree with them. So they kind of blacklisted me, and but as unfit to be a teacher, but yet within 1 year I became a supervisor of 13 teachers, and I got the only one in the system got a meritorious increase in pay for excellence in teaching.
What did you teach?
I was teaching English,
What was the name of that school?
the AI Print
Oh,
School.
and that's still there.
Yes, kind of a dump now.
How long did you stay there?
Oh, 20 years.
Whoa.
But meanwhile, off to the side, I was teaching philosophy at the YMCA and different places. And eventually, I got to work in the community colleges. And for 20 years, I taught in the community colleges, part-time and temporary, almost full-time, between 3 different colleges.
And somewhere in there you must have gotten married because you have a son at least that I know of.
Yes.
You have,
I married 3 years after the war.
how many children?
2 boys.
Did you stay in touch with anybody else from the service after the war, or just your 3 or 4 friends from the USS Beale?
That's all.
Did you go to any reunions?
I went to 2 of them. They had a reunion of the Beale.
And what was that like? Do you remember did everybody look the same?
Well, at that time, yes, because they had just formed the organization, and this was maybe 8 or 9 years after the war.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yeah, but I don't participate in the VFW
Which VFW post?
right here in
East
East
Hartford.
Hartford.
Anything else?
No. I mean, I'm a writer, so I'm more individuals, solitary than social.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Well, just that it's stupid. I mean, as I said, no, just that nothing, once you're in a war and you see it all going on, it's like one big game. And it's foolish when you see, I used to see a lot of dead bodies floating in the water after some of these battles. And you think of it, what a stupid way to go for no reason at all. So I had that strange feeling of, it's stupid. That's about it. Yeah.
How did your service affect your life?
It gave me agoraphobia. I mean, I don't have it now, but it took me a long time to get rid of it. But that wasn't, it was it was also my previous life, because I spent 8 years in an orphan asylum and 2 years in a forest, so I had no social experience. And then the Navy capped it off.
Is there anything else that you would like to add that we have not covered?
That's pretty full. You've covered all my sea battles, my battles, and my experience from the beginning to end. And
Well, are there any other stories or incidents that you can remember?
well, I spent 6 months up in the Aleutian Islands and never got ashore there at all. And
What were you doing up there?
we went up there for the invasion of the island of Kiska.
You
Yeah.
were in the Aleutian Islands, the Atlantic and the Pacific.
Yeah.
You really saw a lot of action.
Well, in fact, our last island we invaded was in the Dutch East Indies, way over the island of Morotai, and that's over near Java and all those places. Yeah.
Now, you were there for the up at the Aleutian Islands for the invasion of Kiska?
Yes.
You didn't get to go on shore there
No.
either?
No. I mean, no. For 6 months we never got ashore. And
Did you have regrets later that you joined the Navy?
yeah, I would have preferred the Army. I would have had some experience. Yeah. Now, I remember I joined the Navy to see the world. I saw a lot of ocean, but I didn't see the world.
You probably saw less than the Army, the Marines, or the Air Corps. If you joined any other branch, you would have seen more.
Right.
Anything else that you can think of?
Well, see, my experience is nothing but combat on water. So
Have you been
Mo-
back on the water since the war? Do you like
No.
being on the water?
no.
Would you go on a cruise?
Well, from what I've heard about these cruise liners, I think I'd appreciate that. But I wouldn't go just to see the water. No. Yet at the time I was in the Navy, you live with something long, you become one with it. I was one with the ocean, and it would have, if I drowned in it, it would have been nothing to me. It was just, I was one with the water. I would have appreciated it almost. Yeah.
Well, and I'd like to thank you for your service to our country, and I'd like to thank you for your
Yeah.
sharing your story with us.